The laughter stopped the moment she set down her tray, and in that silence, 3 military careers began to crumble. Lieutenant Commander Jessica Hayes had walked into countless hostile situations in her 9-year career as a Navy SEAL, but nothing quite compared to the electric tension that crackled through the Marine Corps' mess hall that Tuesday morning. The jokes had been loud enough for the entire room to hear, the mockery had been deliberate, and the 3 Marines at the corner table, Sergeants Dalton, McKay, and Russo, had made absolutely certain she knew she was the punchline. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Jessica had entered the mess hall at 0600, her sealed trident gleaming on her uniform, her posture perfect despite the exhaustion from running a pre-dawn training exercise. The room had been filled with the usual morning chaos, the clatter of metal trays, the smell of industrial coffee and scrambled eggs, the low rumble of tired voices. She'd been through the serving line, nodding politely to the mess staff who knew her by name, and had turned toward an empty table near the windows. That's when the first comment cut through the noise. "Look who thinks she's a real operator, Sergeant." Dalton's voice carried across the hall, dripping with contempt. "Bet she can't even do 10 pull-ups without her participation trophy." The laughter that followed was ugly, the kind that feeds on cruelty and thrives in pack mentality. Jessica had kept walking, her jaw tight, her eyes forward. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. The hell week that earned her that trident had broken men twice her size. But then Sergeant McKay had stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum, and raised his voice even louder. "Hey,
sweetheart. You lost? The administrative offices are in the other building. This is where the real warriors eat." The mess hall had gone quiet then, not completely silent, but quiet enough that everyone could hear. Quiet enough that the other diners had stopped mid-bite, forks hovering, eyes darting between the 3 Marines and the lone SEAL. The air had thickened with the kind of tension that precedes either violence or surrender. Some of the younger enlisted personnel had looked down at their plates, uncomfortable. A few of the older service members had exchanged glances that they knew this was crossing a line, but no one had intervened. Jessica had set her tray down on the table with deliberate calm, the sound of plastic meeting metal impossibly loud in that charged atmosphere. Jen turned around. She hadn't raised her voice. She'd simply pulled out her chair, sat down, and begun eating her breakfast as if nothing had happened. But Sergeant Russo couldn't leave it alone. He'd walked over to her table, his buddies trailing behind him like hyenas following an alpha predator. Up close, he was massive, 6'3", probably 240, with the kind of build that came from years of heavy lifting and combat deployments. He'd leaned down, planting his hands on her table, his face inches from hers. "You know what really pisses me off?" he'd said, his breath hot and coffee stale. "It's that you people get special treatment, lower standards, easier tests, and then you walk around with that trident like you earned it the same way the real SEALs did." Jessica had taken a sip of her orange juice, her hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She'd looked up at him then, her blue-green eyes meeting his, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of that mess hall. "Sergeant Russo, is it?" She glanced at his name tape. "I'm going to finish my breakfast now. You're going to return to your table, and we're both going to pretend this conversation never happened, because I'm giving you an opportunity right now to walk away from what is about to become the biggest mistake of your military career." He'd laughed, a harsh, barking sound devoid of humor. "Or what? You'll report me? Go crying to your commanding officer about hurt feelings?" She'd taken another bite of her eggs, chewed slowly, swallowed. The silence in the mess hall had become absolute. Even the kitchen staff had stopped moving, watching through the serving window. "No," Jessica had said simply, "I won't report you, but the major behind you probably will. The color had drained from Russo's face as he turned to find Major General David Morrison standing 10 feet away, his arms crossed, his expression carved from granite. The base commander, a man whose reputation for zero tolerance regarding conduct unbecoming was legendary throughout the Corps. He'd been standing there for at least 2 minutes, having entered through the side door unnoticed during the confrontation, and he'd heard every word. What none of the 3 Marines knew, what Jessica hadn't bothered to mention because she'd never been one to drop names, was that Major General Morrison has the mission commander on the operation where Jessica had earned her Silver Star. He personally witnessed her carry a wounded teammate through 400 meters of enemy territory under sustained fire, never stopping, never hesitating, saving that man's life. "Gentlemen," the Major General's voice had been soft, which somehow made it more terrifying. "My office, now." The 3 Marines had gone pale, exchanging glances of dawning horror. They'd realized in that instant that they'd just committed career suicide over their own prejudice and insecurity. As they'd filed past Jessica's table toward the exit, she continued eating her breakfast, her expression neutral, offering them nothing, not satisfaction, not pity, not anger. But what happened over the next 72 hours became the stuff of base legend. The investigation had been swift and thorough. It turned out that Dalton and Russo had a history, a pattern of harassment toward female service members that had been documented but never seriously addressed. The Meshal incident had been the final straw. Within a week, all 3 had received non-judicial punishment under Article 15. Dalton and McKay were demoted and reassigned to different bases, their chances of promotion permanently destroyed. Russo, who had the worst record and had been the primary aggressor, was separated from the Marine Corps entirely with a general discharge. But here's what the rumor mill didn't capture. On the morning after the incident, before any official action had been taken, Jessica had gone to Major General Morrison's office and requested leniency for the 3 Marines. She'd argued that public humiliation and severe punishment might satisfy the desire for justice, but it wouldn't change hearts or minds. She'd suggested mandatory bias training and mentorship programs, instead of complete career destruction. The Major General had studied her across his desk, this young officer who had every right to demand retribution, and he'd asked her why. "Because, sir," she'd said, "I didn't join the SEALs to prove I was better than anyone. I joined to serve alongside the best, regardless of gender. Those men don't understand what we bring to the mission because they've never seen it. Breaking them down won't build them up. Teaching them might." In the end, Morrison had split the difference. The formal punishment stood because there had to be accountability. But he'd also implemented Jessica's suggestions base-wide, creating new training protocols that would eventually be adopted across multiple installations. 2 years later, Jessica would receive a letter from Sergeant Russo. He'd found civilian work as a security contractor, had gone through therapy for his anger issues, and had written to apologize, not with excuses, but with genuine remorse. He'd ended the letter by saying that losing his military career had been the wake-up call he needed to become a better man. And while he couldn't undo the past, he was grateful she'd offered him dignity, even when he'd shown her none. Jessica kept that letter in her desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even the most broken situations could sometimes mend if someone was willing to extend grace alongside accountability. The Meshal incident became a teaching case at the Naval Academy, a real-world example of how to handle discrimination with both strength and wisdom. Jessica never sought the spotlight for it. She simply went back to her work, leading her SEAL team through successful operations, mentoring the next generation of operators, proving every single day that excellence has no gender requirement. Because real strength isn't about dominating those who doubt you. It's about standing firm in who you are, while leaving the door open for others to learn and grow. And sometimes the most powerful response to mockery isn't revenge, but the quiet dignity of someone who knows exactly who they are and what they've earned. If this story moved you,
drop a comment below about a time when you chose dignity over vengeance. And if you're new here, subscribe, because every week we share stories about courage that doesn't shout and humanity that changes hearts. Thanks for being here.